in 5-10 minutes. Okay, so I think we can start by 11:04, 11:05. Okay. Yeah, I just had a word with Siddharth. He's joining in a minute. So we are good to go. I think once he joins, maybe in another minute we can start.
Okay, so let's get started. So now, yesterday we discussed about the roles and responsibilities. So we have discussed about in detail the executive management, security officer, information system security professional, data information and business owners, custodian, information system auditor, security admin, and system admin. So if we are talking about system and network administrators, they are the one system administrators. They are basically responsible for day-to-day activities like patching the system, working with the vulnerability assessment report to fix the vulnerabilities which has been discovered, modifying the configuration of the system, upgrading the system. All that are the roles and responsibilities of the system administrator. When I'm talking about a network administrator is the one who basically manages the network. So live example, you have your organization is having a router, switch, firewalls. So basically creating a rule in the router, switch and firewall, blocking a port, okay, testing any changes of the rule, okay, patching and installing the updates, updating the firmware, all that is also the responsibility of the network administrator only. We have a legal counsel team. Now, legal counsel team is one thing which you need to remember from the exam point of view. Whenever you are working with a supply chain, whenever you are working, your organization is going to onboard a new contractor, a new vendor, or you are going to onboard a new supplier, or your organization is dealing with the acquisition and merger, you have to take help from the legal counsel team, because they are the one who basically, they know the regulations, like what kind of law of the land the organization has to follow. So basically, you need to take help of the legal counsel. We also have a quality assurance tester who basically check the quality of the process. So quality assurance testers, many people think that quality assurance testers is only related to the software development lifecycle. That's not there. That's not it. Quality assurance tester can also check the quality of the process, information security policy which your organization is having. And finally, we have a policy/compliance officer. So these are basically your DPO. DPO stands for your data privacy officer. Now, in regards to the policy compliance officer, let me take a scenario. So let's take an example that currently we have a company. We have a company called as Contoso.com. Contoso.com. Now the Contoso.com office is somewhere in, let's say, Indore. The reason why I am taking the example of Indore because it is my native place. So let's say currently we have 3 floors. We have a first floor, we have a second floor, and we have a third floor. Okay. The first floor. So in the first floor, we have a PPT. So what is a PPT? PPT stands for people. PPT stands for people. It stands for process. And it stands for technology. It stands for people, process, and technology. Okay. So basically in the first floor, I have a PPT, people, process, and technology. In the second floor also, I have a people, process, and technology. And in the third floor also, we have a people, process, and technology. Okay. Now, in the first floor, the people they are basically working with the EU-based customer. Okay, in the first floor, they are basically working with the EU-based customer. So basically, they are collecting the PII data of EU citizens. So definitely, they have to be compliant with GDPR. Definitely, they have to be compliant with GDPR. When I am talking about in the second floor, there we basically people, process, and technology. They are basically collecting PHI details, protected health information details for US-based customers. So definitely, second floor has to be compliant with HIPAA. Second floor has to be compliant with HIPAA regulation. Now, the third floor here, they are basically processing PCI DSS. Okay, they are basically processing PCI DSS. So basically, they are collecting debit and credit card. Debit and credit card details. Debit and credit card details. Which is, so basically they have to comply with the PCI DSS standard. Okay. Now my question is, so let's say in this case, in Contoso.com, which is based out in Indore location, they need to create a policy. They need to create a standard. They need to create a policy. They need to create a standard. They need to create a procedure. Okay, and they need to create a baseline. Now, all these has to be compliant. All this has to be compliant with all these regulation. Okay. Now, let's say currently we basically have a person called as Aditya. We basically have a person called as Aditya. Okay. Who is basically the CISO of this organization. Okay. He is basically a CISO of this organization. Now, why he is identified as CISO? Because he is having a CISSP certification. Now, my question is for everyone. Will Aditya will be able to create policy, standard, procedure, and baseline, which can be compatible with all these regulation and standards? Will he able to create? Will he be able to create GDPR, a policy, standard, procedure, and baseline, which can be compatible with all these regulations and standards? The answer is no. Now, why the answer is no? Because you are here for studying CISSP. In CISSP, we study GDPR, we study HIPAA, we study BCI DSS, but we only study the overview of that. Okay, we don't know end to end how to implement a policy or a regulation. That is the reason we need to take a help of someone called as a DPO. That is called as your data privacy officer. That is basically called as your data privacy officer. Okay, so the data privacy officer is the one who basically has in-depth knowledge of implementing this particular rule. Okay, now one live example, data privacy officer are those people who basically have a ISO standard certification. So like ISO 27001 lead implementer. Okay, ISO 27001 lead implementer. Then we basically have a CIPP. We basically have a CIPP. So CIPP specifically deals with the EU-based GDPR certification. So people who are having this certifications like ISO 27001 lead implementer, or people who are basically having, CIPP certification in GDPR and all, they are considered as a data privacy officer. So they will basically understand the organization vision and mission. Okay, they will understand the vision and mission of the organization. And first, what they will do? First, they will create one common policy. Okay, they will create one common policy. Okay, now when I say first, they will create one common policy. Okay, why a common policy is needed? Because even though if I am having three different, regulation, like I need to implement GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS, there will be some overlapping of controls between all these three. Okay, there will be definitely some overlapping of controls between all these three. One live example of this I can give you is that data masking is a requirement which is there in all the three. Okay, data masking is a requirement which is there in all the three. Okay, sensitive data must be masked. So basically, the data privacy officer will first create a common policy where he will add all the controls which are overlapping with each other. Once the common policy is created and they have added all the overlapping controls, whatever deviation is there, for that deviation, they will create a separate policy, standard, procedure, and baseline. So this is how we basically create the policy, standard, procedure, and baseline specifically in those organizations where there are multiple regulations needs to be followed. Like one live example I can give you. If GDPR, if people, process, and technology who are working in the first floor, we need to make sure that only people who are working in that particular project should have access to the first floor. Anyone from second and third floor should not be able to swipe their access card in the first floor. The same way, we need to also create a network isolation by creating VLANs and all. Okay, so whatever the common controls we have, for that we will create a common policy, and whatever deviations is there, for those deviations we will create a separate policy which will further divided into standard, procedures, and baselines. Now the reason why I am mentioning this, because many in my earlier batches, many people, they think that, they ask me this common question: after we clear the CISSP, what would be our role and responsibility? Do we have to create a policy, standard, and procedure? No, you don't have to create, but yes, you have to work with the data privacy officer to, mention your requirement and then help them to create a policy, standard, and procedure which can basically meet all the regulation requirements. So that is the reason why we say that policy compliance officers, these are basically those people who are considered as a data privacy officer, who basically know one regulation in depth. And ideally, my recommendation as an information system security professional is, after you clear CISSP and all, I would recommend that at least you go for any one, regulation where you should know end to end how to deploy it. Okay, either it should be a GDPR or it should be a ISO 27000 lead implementer, because that is going to help you in your career. Is this point clear for everyone?
Yes,
Any
ma'am.
questions?
Yes,
Any
sir.
questions? So basically, what are the responsibilities of an information security officer? Information security officers are the one who are accountable for ensuring the protection of all the business information assets from intentional and unintentional loss, disclosure, alteration, destruction, and unavailability. That is the responsibility of an information security officer. Different model of reporting of a security officer. I have already discussed this in detail. So basically, a CISO should always, the best recommended approach. The best recommended approach is that a CISO should always report to a CEO. Now, why it is not recommended that a CISO is being reporting to a, a CIO or a CTO and all, because it is not necessary that the CIO and CTO will have the information security technical background. So what will happen if the CIO and CTO, they don't understand the cyber security terms? The CISO will communicate something else. The CISO will communicate something. The CIO and CTO will understand something and they will communicate something else to the CEO. So there is going to be a lot of gap in the communication. So in order to avoid the gaps and all, it is basically better that a CISO always reports to a CEO. Sorry, second. Okay, now in some organization, a CISO can also report to a IT department. That is also possible. So basically reporting to a CIO, CTO. In some organizations, we have seen that a CISO reports to the administrative service department. So administrative service department means your HR head and all. Okay. Reporting to the insurance and risk management department. This is normally we have seen in the insurance and financial sectors where a CISO is reporting to a CFO. Okay. CFO, financial officer. We also have seen something where a CISO reports to the internal audit department and legal department as well. But from the exam point of view, you need to remember the most effective approach of a CISO reporting is to a CEO. Take a screenshot of this. So basically, the summary is senior manager, they have the ultimate responsibility of security. Whereas the InfoSec officer, they only are having functional responsibility for security. We have a owner, data owner, which basically determines the data classification. We basically have a custodian who basically preserves the information of CIA. We have a user and operator which performs IAW with the stated policies. And we have an auditor who examines the security. Now, what is an IAW team? What is an IAW?
No, don't know, Mani. I'm hearing this for the first time.
Okay, what about others? IAW stands for in accordance with. If you remember, my day one, I mentioned this already. In CISSP, Rahul Gandhi dictionary is not going to work. You need to have a good amount of proficiency in the English. So IAW stands for in accordance with stated policies. Now, the next is team, we have a control framework. So now, first of all, what is a framework? A framework is a logical structure. The intent of a framework is to document and organize the process. A benchmark which is intended to help an organization identify their capabilities and compare those efforts to a similar peer or competitor. Now, if I have to give a layman example between a framework and standard, which can be understandable to the participants within short amount of time. The best example of this is in tier 1 cities. Okay, in tier 1 cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Chennai and all, you cannot afford building an individual duplex house. Okay, if you are planning to build a house in tier 1 metro cities, okay, like Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad and all, by purchasing a land and you are planning to build your own house, that is something which is not possible. practically, unless and until you have a huge amount of black money. Okay. So normally people who are working in the tier 1 cities, they basically go for a flat system. Okay. They will either go for a 2 BHK or 3 BHK flat. Now, one live example of a 2 BHK and 3 BHK flat. So you can say your 2 BHK and 3 BHK flat is just like your standard. So basically why I call this as a standard, because in 2 BHK and 3 BHK flat system, when you are going, you don't get a lot of customization. Like if I want to, I want to keep my living room and bedroom little big. Okay. That is something which is not possible if I am going for a flat based system. Okay. If I want to keep my kitchen area little big, or if I want to keep my balcony little big, that is something which is not possible for me to go for a flat based system, because in the flat based system, the way the builder has constructed, that is the same way I have to go and buy it. Okay. Of course, you can do some little customization, like you can, you can basically modify your kitchen and all. But if I have to, increase the size of the balcony, or if I want my living room to be little short, but my bedroom should be big, that kind of customization I cannot get in the standard. So that is the reason why we say standards are specific and rigid. They are accepted best method. It is only one way. So there is no option for you for, you cannot do any kind of R&D on that, research and development. But in the same way, if I go, instead of buying a flat on tier 1 cities, and that too, if you are going and buying a flat on tier 1 cities, in any metro cities right now, the price of it's around 1.2 to 1.3. We are going for a 2 BHK. After spending so much, you are not getting you are basically getting a rigid model. But at the same time, if I don't want to, spend that much money in tier 1 cities, and rather I am going for a tier 2 or tier 3 cities, like, we have a Nagpur, we have Indore, and we have other places like tier 2, tier 3 cities. In these cities, what is the advantage? First of all, the property rates is not that high comparative to what you are getting in tier 1 cities. You can buy a land. You can basically construct the house according to your preference. So basically, you can give instructions to the builder that this is how I want. On top of that, you can also, in that little area, whichever. So let's say if you are buying a 1,200 square feet of house, you can also plan a garden and all, which is something which you will not get if you are going for a flat system. That is the reason why we say frameworks are general, they are flexible, they allow for experimentation. There are multiple ways of implementing a framework. They define the system and guidelines only latitude. So that is the reason why we say, rather than implementing all the standard as it is, we are basically implementing a framework where we are only taking what is necessary. So now one thing which I would recommend over here is, when we are talking about COBIT, is basically a governance framework. Okay. COBIT is basically a governance framework. Okay. So now let's say if I have to implement. Okay. Now taking my earlier example. Okay. Taking my earlier example. In this, if I am taking this example, okay, if I have to, implement a GDPR, HIPAA and PCI DSS standard as it is. Okay. This is a live example of a standard only. Okay. So what do you think, team? Implementing these standards as it is written, is it easy task or it is a very complicated task? Definitely it is a complicated task. Okay. There will be an overlapping of controls. Okay. There will be an overlapping of controls, and you are basically implementing a standard as it is written. There will be an overlapping, and plus you are also implementing the controls, which is something your organization doesn't need. So let's take an example that currently my organization needs that we should have a physical segregation between first, second, and third floor. and we should have a data masking solution. Okay, but at this point of time, we don't want a DLP. Okay, we don't want a DLP. But because you are not using a framework, you are basically using a standard. Even though if you don't want, you have to go and implement a DLP because that is what is instructed by the GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS. Okay, but at the same time, if you are creating a framework, now what is the advantage in the framework? I am choosing only that controls which are, I am choosing only that controls which can support my vision and mission. So rather than implementing everything, I am choosing only what is needed at the most of my organization. So that is the reason why we say that in framework, you get an option of doing experimentation, which you don't get when you implement a standard. So now in this, if you can see, we have a security blueprint. Now this security blueprint contains controls from ISO 27000, ITIL, and GDPR and PCI DSS. So basically, we are choosing only that controls which is necessary for our organization. Okay, rather than implementing everything what is documented in the standard like your PCI DSS or your NIST. Is this point clear for everyone?
Clear.
So from the exam point of view, you need to remember that COBIT is basically a governance framework. Now let me just show you one example of a COBIT. Yeah, so this is the COBIT 2019 toolkit. Now, if you see over here, let me open it. So this is one live example of a COBIT framework. As you can see over here, we have multiple controls. So we have evaluate, direct, and monitor. So as you can see, based on, so if I am talking about, so as you can see, manage compliance with external controls, risk optimization, okay, manage IT changes, change acceptance. So if you see, for each and everything, we basically have a scoping. If you go to the objective practices, you will basically see what is needed and what are the activities which needs to be performed. So this is one live example of a COBIT 2019 governance framework model. Okay, don't worry, I will share this in the Google Drive. So you can take a look at into that in detail. Let me open this another one. So as you can see, this is a COBIT 2019 RACI tool. As you can see, what is the practice? Board. What are the executive communities? Okay. Now here in this, you can see what is the role and responsibilities of a CEO, of a CFO, of a chief operating officer, chief risk officer, chief information officer, CDO, IT governance board. This is where you come into the picture. All this is given. This is the roles and responsibilities of a CISO. So this is how your IT COBIT governance model looks like. Clear for everyone?
Yes.
Now, the next is we have a liability due care and due diligence. Very, very important. and 100% confirm in the exam. Now, it is my personal assurance for everyone that without this, the examination will not end. This is my personal guarantee for everyone. Now, when I'm talking about due care, so what do you mean by due care? Due care is the standard of care that a prudent person would have exercised under the same or similar condition what the organization owes its customer. Okay, actions taken by an organization to protect its stakeholders, investors, employees, and customers from harm. Whereas your due diligence is an investigation of a business or a person, generally before entering into a contract, an activity which is used to demonstrate and provide due care. Okay, now one live example I can give you. Due diligence means before you enter into a contract, and due care means after you enter into a contract. So now one live example of a due diligence I can give you. So you people wanted to clear CISSP exam. Okay, you people wanted to clear CISSP exam. So now what you people did, you basically researched which institute is good for attempting the CISSP exam. Okay, what is the pricing? Okay, what is the pricing? How much time? What is the batch schedule? All this thing you did. Okay, so basically that is your due diligence activity. So before you enrolled in the IEVISION CISSP training, you did your due research, due diligence, where you check the website, you basically connected with the sales team, you inquired about the trainer, you looked the trainer into the LinkedIn profile, all that thing you did. That is a live example of a due diligence before you enter into a contract. Okay, now one another live example of a due diligence I can give you. Let's say in this case, Aditya wants to buy a two-wheeler. Okay, so now before Aditya wants to buy the two-wheeler, Aditya is trying to identify that which kind of two-wheeler he wants to buy, whether he wants to buy a scooty or whether he wants to buy a bike. Let's say he decided to buy a scooty. So which scooty is best in the market, which is providing more mileage, in which scooty the maintenance is less. Okay, what is the costing of the scooty? Okay, how much insurance I have to pay? What is the body of the scooty, whether it is metal body or fiber body? Okay, he checked the YouTube reviews and all. What kind of tire it is made, whether it is a tubeless tire or not. All these things Aditya researched before he decided that he wants to go with a Honda Activa scooty. That is your due diligence activity. Now, once he has satisfied that yes, he wants to go for buying an Honda Activa. Now, what he did after he brought the Honda Activa, he's following the due care. Now, what is the due care? Paying the insurance premium on time. Okay, wearing the helmet, taking Activa cover. So when the Activa is not being used, he will cover it with the sheet so that it should not be getting damaged with the rain and sunlight. All this activity he is doing. That is your due care. So due care means paying your insurance premium on time, wearing the helmet, okay, and putting the seat belt. All these are basically your due care activity. One another live example of a due diligence and due care I can give you. Again, let's take an example. We have a person called as Aditya. Now Aditya he wants to change his phone. He is basically using an iPhone 6 or iPhone 7. Okay, now he has decided that he wants to upgrade his phone, but he is not able to decide that whether he should go for the Android or iOS. So he has selected two phones. One is your OnePlus 12 and one is your iPhone 15 Plus. So now he is comparing. Okay, he is comparing the features. He is comparing the functionality. He is checking the reviews. He is checking the camera quality. He is checking the reselling cost. All that thing he is checking. That is your due diligence. Now, once after doing all this due diligence and all, he finally decided that he wants to go for iPhone 15 Plus. After he brought the iPhone 15 Plus, he is putting the screen guard. He is putting the case. He is purchasing an Apple Care plan. That is a live example of a due care activity. So due care is the standard of care that a prudent person would have exercised under the same or similar condition what the organization owes its customers. Actions taken by an organization to protect its stakeholders, investors, employees, and customers from harm. Due diligence is an investigation of a business or a person generally before entering into a contract. Any activity used to demonstrate or provide due care. It is the care and caution a reasonable person would take. Unfortunately, in this batch, no one verified my CISSP credentials. So you people missed to do the due diligence activity. So prudent man rule, performing an annual security audit is a due diligence, but taking the corrective action from the results of an audit is a due care. I believe due care and due diligence is clear for everyone once and for all.
Clear.
Question. Read the question carefully, read the answers, read the questions, identify the keywords, and then give the answer. This is my caffeine shots.
So I think first question it is they have not exercised due care protecting computing resources.
Please don't unmute yourself and speak. Paste the answer in the chat box. I don't want other participants to getting disturbed. Okay. Under the principle, let me check what answer you people have given. Sid, basically, you have to tell whether the answer is C or B. Okay. Okay, let us discuss this. Under the principle of negligence, executives can be held liable for losses that result from system breaches if the company is a multinational company. Okay, they have not exercised due care protecting computing resources. They have failed to properly ensure computer resources against loss. The company does not prosecute the hacker caused the breach. The question is talking, the keyword in this question is principle of negligence. Okay, under which condition executables can be held liable for losses that result from system breaches if they have not exercised due care, protecting the computing resources. So the answer is B. Which of the following would not violate? Here the keyword is team not violate. Okay, here the keyword is not violate the due diligence concept. So let us break down this question. Security policy being outdated, definitely it is going to violate the due diligence concept. So A is gone. Data owners not laying out the foundation for data protection, this will also violate the due diligence concept. So B is gone. Network administrator not taking mandatory 2 weeks vacation as planned. This is also going to violate the due diligence, because in some organizations, taking a mandatory vacation of 2 weeks as planned is mandatory. So even C is gone. What will not violate the due diligence concept is latest security patches for servers being installed as per the patch management process. So the best answer in this is D. The best answer is D. Next question. Read the question carefully, guys. So due care is not related to what? Good faith, prudent man, profit, and best interest. See, once again, the keyword in this question is due care is not related. Okay, so the keyword is not related to. Okay, the keyword is not related. So definitely it should be related to the good faith. So first, before we identify not related, first we need to identify what is related. So due care should be related to the good faith. It should be related to the best interest of the organization, and it should be related to the prudent man. But it should not be only related to profit. Now, why it is should not be only related to the profit? Because the organization can fall or can do fraudulent means to increase their profit. So that is the reason why we say that due care should be related to the good faith, prudent man, and best interest, but it should not be purely based on profit. That is the reason why the answer is C. Just a second. No one answer. Good faith. Okay. Clear? Sid and Akbar. Why?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. So how do you like the question? Confusing, challenging?
Confusing,
Yes,
sir.
bit challenging.
Yeah, confusing and challenging, I guess.
Welcome to the CISSP. Second. Okay. Now I'm going to paste some questions in the chat. Okay. Now I want you people to take 2 minutes and give me the answer whether it is a due care or due diligence. Okay. You have to give the answer whether it is a due care or due diligence. Start. Okay. So now implementing a firewall rule. So implementing a firewall rule team is a due care. Okay, because you are implementing. Okay, you are implementing. So is it a due care or due diligence? Answer is it's a due care. Okay. Before releasing a patch, make sure that the patch management process works effectively. Whether it's a due care or due diligence. Answer is it is due diligence. Okay. Answer is it is due diligence. Okay. Before releasing a patch, make sure that the patch management process works effectively. That is your due diligence. Monitoring the network for malicious activity. So basically you are monitoring the network for new threats, new risks and new vulnerabilities. That is the reason why the answer is due care. Before taking an action, do your homework. Okay, before taking any action, do your homework. This is called as due diligence. So basically you are researching before you take any action. Research of the network security product before implementing. Okay, research of the network security product before implementing. The answer is due diligence. Before procuring a vendor, doing the research of the vendor. So before you onboard a new vendor, you are basically doing a research of the vendor. So what do you mean by doing a research of the vendor? You are basically asking them to share the latest VAPT report, share the audit report and all. So that is basically your due diligence. Okay. Once you procure a vendor, consistently monitoring the vendor activity. Once you procure the vendor, consistently monitoring the vendor activity. This is your due care. This is your due care because now the vendor is onboarded. So we want to make sure that even though the vendor is onboarded, they should not commit any frauds. So basically we are consistently monitoring the vendor activity. That is your due care. Installing antivirus and ensuring antivirus should have up-to-date signatures. Once again, it is a due care. Okay, due care. Visiting the doctor when you are sick and taking medication. Again, due care. Researching a good doctor before visiting. Again, it's a due diligence. It's a due diligence. So I believe due care and due diligence is clear for everyone, once and for all. Guys?
Yes.
So now the next topic is we have a compliance. So now what do you mean by compliance? Compliance in this topic, we are going to discuss between legislative and regulatory compliance, privacy requirement, privacy, data breaches, relevant laws and regulations and policy. So compliance means what? Act of abiding. Okay, compliance means what? It is basically the act of abiding. Okay, that is called as your compliance. Okay, so one live example of a compliance I can give you is when you people were child. Okay, when you go out of the house, your dad and your mom or your grandparents, they used to implement a regulation that whoever is outside of the house, maximum before 10 o'clock, everyone should be inside the house. Okay, if you would have stayed in the joint family, the elders, they used to implement a compliance that everyone who is there in the house, they should, whoever is whoever is outside of the house, maximum before 10 o'clock, everyone should be there inside the house, and by 11 o'clock, everyone should go to sleep. So this is a compliance which was basically being set by our grandparents or by our elders, which was being followed by us. So that is a live example of a compliance. So compliance means act of abiding. So compliance is equal to adherence to the external mandate. So privacy is the right of every human being to control the manner and extent to which information about him or her is distributed. So we basically have audits/auditing. So audit/auditing, the tools, process and activities. So with the help of audit, Okay, now there are different types of audit. So we have an internal audit, we have an external audit, we have basically a third party audit and all. So when we will discuss the domain 6, that time we will basically cover all the types of audits. But for now, just remember that audit is basically used to check that whether the organization is compliant with the regulation. See, it is two different things, that the organization saying that they are compliant and actually they are compliant or not. So whether they are actually compliant or not, that is something which can be verified and it can be validated with the help of auditing. Okay, so one live example of auditing the tools, process and activities used to perform compliance review. One live example of this audited is, if you remember in my day one, I gave you the example. See, CISSP exam is not like others. Okay, there are two parts of the CISSP. What is that? First part is to clear the exam. When you clear the exam, you have only provisionally passed the CISSP exam. But still, you cannot call yourself as a CISSP because you have to prove your 5 years of work experience in any of the 2 domains out of 8 which we cover in the CISSP. So now when you submit your endorsement, ISC Square, they basically audit your work experience. They basically audit your work experience. They audit your roles and responsibilities. They basically reach out to your current and ex-manager and ask them to do the endorsement, confirm that you were doing all this activity. So that is a live example of an auditing. Once ISC Square has recognized that yes, you have the experience, then only they will reward you with the CISSP certificate. So that is what your auditing is all about. So auditing auditing the tools, process and activities which is used to perform the compliance reviews. Now, when we are talking about privacy requirements for compliance, so we have a European Union member nation. So we have a DPD, which is called as your Data Protection Directive. We basically have an Australian Privacy Act. We basically have a PIPDA. In Canada, we have a Personal Data Protection Law, PDPA. In Argentina. In United States, we have a HIPAA and GLBA. And for credit card, we basically have a PCI DSS. Now, one thing from the exam point of view, which you need to remember is, for all other countries like EU, we have a GDPR. For Canada, we have a PIPDA. The United States is the only country where there is no specific country-wise regulation. There they have an industry-based standard. So if you are collecting the PHI data of the health sector, then you have to be compliant with the HIPAA standard. If you are working with the, banks, financial institutions, then you have to be compliant with the GLBA. If you are working with the, let's say, publicly traded companies whose stocks are listed in the share market and all, there you have to be compliant with the SOC. So in United States, there is no specific regulation like in Canada and European, like in Europe. So for US, there are industry specific standards which the company has to follow. Now, one thing which you need to remember from the exam point of view is that the European Union member nation, the DPD Data Protection Directive, the Data Protection Directive has become obsolete. It is no longer utilized. Okay. The Data Protection Directive is being replaced. The Data Protection Directive is being replaced by GDPR. The Data Protection Directive is being replaced by GDPR. So now in the exam, if you get a question, when exactly the GDPR was launched? Any idea when was the GDPR launched? Any idea when was the GDPR launched? So remember that the GDPR was approved. It was approved by the Parliament in 2016, but it was enforced from 2018 only. Okay, remember this. This point is testable in the exam, that in the GDPR, it was introduced and approved by it was introduced and approved by the European Parliament in 2016, but it was enforced from 2018. Okay. Now the question is that in case, so basically now the next is you have to, so basically your data protection directive, this is basically replaced by the GDPR. Okay, this is basically replaced by the GDPR. So now the next is you need to understand what is the notification frequency. Okay, the next is you need to understand what is the notification frequency in case of a breach. And then the next important element which you need to understand is the fines. Okay, so now the question is when I'm talking about notification frequency, so let's say you are working in a company called as Contoso. Now there is a GDPR breach has occurred. So now what should be notification frequency? It should be 24 hours. It should be 48 hours. It should be 72 hours. Or it should be ASAP. So what should be the GDPR notification frequency? What is the most recommended approach for a GDPR notification frequency? 24, 48 or 72? Or as soon as possible? Tell me, take your time, take 1 minute, think, and then give me an answer. See now many people, if you refer Cybex, okay, if you refer Cybex and all-in-one, in Cybex it is given as 24 hours, in all-in-one it is given as 48 hours, but in CISSP CBK it is 72 hours. So the actual answer is 72 hours. But in my case, even C is not the answer because in the fourth option, we have an option called as soon as possible. So the moment you are aware that there is a GDPR breach has occurred, you have to inform as soon as possible. Okay, you should not wait for 72 hours. But in case if the as soon as possible option is not there, then you can go with the answer C. So ideally, the answer will be D, as soon as possible. But if that is not an option, then you can go with the 72 hours. Is this point clear for everyone? Is this point clear for everyone?
Yes, sir.
Now the next is GDPR fines. Now the next is GDPR fine. Just a second, team, I'll be back. Okay, so now the next is your GDPR fines. So now when we are talking about the GDPR fines team, from the exam point of view, you need to remember that in case if the GDPR breach has occurred, the organization has to pay 20 million euros, okay, or 4% of the annual revenue, whichever is higher. Okay, I repeat, when we are talking about the GDPR, second. So basically, when we are talking about the GDPR fines, if the company is found liable, you have to pay 20 million euros. 20 million euros. Or 4% of the annual revenue. 4% of the annual revenue, whichever is higher. Now, these two elements are confirmed in the exam. One is your notification frequency team and one is your GDPR fines. They both are confirmed in the exam. So basically, you need to remember that when we are talking about the fine, it is 20 million euros or 4% of the annual revenue, whichever is higher. Okay. So in the exam, GDPR is testable. HIPAA and GLBA is testable. PCI DSS is testable. Okay, and even PIPDA is testable. That is your Canada Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. So now when we are talking about PIPDA, just a second, Deep. Okay, so now the PIPDA is also testable in the exam. So now when I am talking about PIPDA team, for PIPDA, the what is testable in the exam is the PIPDA fines. Okay, so the PIPDA penalties, please make a note of it. The PIPDA penalties, it can start from 10,000 US dollars to up to 1 lakh US dollars. Okay, it can start from 10,000 US dollars up to 1 lakh US dollars. Now, so in the exam, you may get a question about PIPDA penalties. So from the exam point of view, you need to remember that for PIPDA, which is being used in Canada, the fines can be up to 10,000 US dollars or up to 1 lakh US dollars. Now, the next is team, we have a HIPAA and we have a GLBA. Before we discuss HIPAA, we will discuss the GLBA. Now, I have seen that many people, they get confused between GLBA and SOC. Okay. Now, the basic difference between the GLBA and SOC is GLBA is specifically used by financial institutions team. Okay. Just a second. GLBA is basically used by financial institutions. They are basically used by financial institutions. So now when I am talking about financial institutions and all in US and all, we have basically this BOA, Bank of America. Then we basically have your JP Morgan. Okay, we have basically your JP Morgan. Then we have your, what do you call that? Morgan Stanley. All these are basically live examples which will be used by GLBA, which has to be compliant with GLBA. So now when I say that, it is being used by financial institutions. So basically the financial, so whenever anyone in the US, when they are applying any kind of loans, whether it is a, four-wheeler loan, whether it is a house loan or anything, the financial institutions like, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they basically check their salary, what kind of liability they are having, how much existing loan they are paying, and how many years of service it is left. And based on all that, okay, I repeat, based on all that, a decision will be made that whether the loan will be granted or not. Okay, the same way in India, we have something called as a CIBIL score. We have something called as a CIBIL score. So the moment you apply for any kind of personal loan, four-wheeler, two-wheeler or car loan, the first thing which the institution checks is your CIBIL score. That what is your CIBIL score? If your CIBIL score is above 750, then only you can apply for any kind of loans. So here in the GLBA, Gram Lychee Billy Act, they basically, banks like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they have to protect the customer financial information. Like they have to protect the customer tax records. They have a liability that they have to send annual customer bank, and they have to send annually bank statement. They have to send monthly bank statement to the customer over their email address. Okay, they have to notify the customer that how much EMI is pending versus how many of them are actually paid. In case if there is a change in the interest rate of the house loan and all, they have to notify the customer. They have to make sure that the customer financial information should be protected. It should not be disclosed to any other third party without the consent of the customer. All these comes under the GLBA, that is your Gram Leach Billy Act, which is specifically used by financial institutions. So any question in the exam talking about financial institutions, customer, okay, annual customer, keywords are there like financial institutions are there, bank statement, okay, then protecting the financial information of the customer, this kind of keywords are there. The answer is GLBA, that is your Gram Leach Billy Act. Is this point clear for everyone? Is the Gram Leach Billy Act is clear for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, now the next is, we have a SOC. Now, even though SOC is not covered in this, basically it is in depth, it is covered in the, domain 6, but I will give you a brief overview. SOC stands for Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Now, when I'm talking about SOC basically deals with the financial effectiveness of the company. Okay, so basically your SOC reports deals with the publicly traded companies who are listed in the stock market, who are basically listed in the NSE, okay, National Stock Exchange or Bombay Stock Exchange and all. Okay, so basically if I have to evaluate the financial effectiveness of the company, how sound is the financial position of the company, okay, then I will ask the company to share the SOC 1 report. So normally the SOC 1 report is interested by those people like your tax authorities, okay, your board of directors, stakeholders, or customers who are planning to buy or invest in shares of the company. Okay, all these people will be interested in the SOC report. Like one live example I can give you. In this case, we have a person called as Aditya. Now, Aditya wants to invest in some mutual fund. So basically, he is going and checking in the internet that in the last 5 years and 10 years, how much return this particular mutual fund has given. So that is a live example of, so basically in this case, Aditya is checking the financial effectiveness of the organization. So how sound the financial position of the organization is. So with the help of your SOC reports, okay, so SOC is specifically used only for the publicly traded companies which are listed in the stock market like your National Stock Exchange and your Bombay Stock Exchange. So where we can identify that how much liabilities the company is having versus what all their assets. Okay, we can also identify that. So mainly the SOC report is SOC report are normally asked by the people, like auditors will ask for a SOC report, your investors, your stakeholders, your customers. Okay, if you are applying for any kind of loan from the bank, okay, so your bank manager, they will basically ask the company to share the SOC report. So SOC is specifically used for your publicly traded organization which are listed in the stock market. Now we have a different kind of SOC report. We have a SOC 1 report. We have a SOC 2 report. Under SOC 1 and SOC 2, we also have a SOC 3 report. We have a type 1 and type 2. All these things in detail we will discuss in the domain 6. Okay, now is the SOC part clear for everyone? Introduction of SOC?
Yes.
SOC part clear? Okay. Now the next is team, we have a HIPAA. Okay, so HIPAA, as the name indicates, it is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So if your organization is working for any customer, if your organization is basically collecting PII or PHI data, if your organization is collecting PHI data of any patient, then they have to be compliant with the HIPAA regulation. They have to be compliant with the HIPAA regulation. So that is the reason why we say that HIPAA is a regulation which is only followed in the US. Okay, so if you are collecting PHI details, of the customer, like their, you have access, your company have access to the, patient health records, like their blood test and all, and their operational records and all, you have access, then you have to be compliant with the HIPAA regulation. So HIPAA is not only applicable for the hospitals, but it is also applicable for the healthcare industries who are providing equipment and all to the hospitals. So in case if you are, we have this AccuCheck and all, which basically checks your blood sugar level and all, even they have to be compliant with the HIPAA regulation. So any healthcare industries, okay, who are processing the customer PHI data, any healthcare industries which are processing the customer PHI data, they have to have compliant with the HIPAA regulation. So it is not only applicable to the hospitals, but it is also applicable to the healthcare industries who are supplying equipments and all to the hospitals or the healthcare industries. So that is what your HIPAA is all about. The next test team, we have a PCI DSS 100% confirm in the exam. Okay, 100% confirm in the exam. So now we are going to discuss the PCI DSS in detail. Anyone feeling sleepy?
No.
No.
Okay, just a second. Just a second, team. Let me look where it is. Just a second, team. I'm just stopping the screen share for 1 minute. Okay, got it. I was not able to get the sheet, but I'm sharing on another thing. I will try to search the sheet and I will upload it in the Google Drive before tomorrow's session. Okay. So now the next is team, we have an overview of PCI compliance. Now these are the 12 requirements of the PCI compliance team. 100% testable in the exam. All these 12 requirements, so minimum on an average, we can say that up to 5 to 6 questions will come from the PCI DSS standard in the domain 1. Okay, 5 to 6 questions, I repeat, will be coming from the PCI DSS standard in domain 1. So now what is the first control which we are having? The first control which we are having is the installing and maintaining a firewall configuration to protect the card holder data. So now what do you mean by that? PCI DSS requires proper firewall configuration, including the strong passwords and access control. It means that we must implement a firewall which can protect the card holder data, and it should have strong passwords and access controls. So any traffic which is not allowed explicitly, it should be blocked. So traffic must be blocked too. And from the untrusted networks and personal firewalls are required for all devices that access the card holder data. So the first requirement is the installing and maintaining a firewall configuration to protect the card holder data. Now, what is the second requirement stands? The second requirement stands that do not use vendor supplied defaults for system passwords and other security. So by default, all password must be replaced with strong passwords before a new device can connect to card holder data online. So whichever device you are using, you might be using a router, switch, firewall, IDS, IPS, any devices, hardware or software devices you are using, you should never use the vendor supplied default passwords. So that is the second requirement. What is the third requirement stands? The third requirement stands for protecting the card holder data. So the card holder data should be kept only as long as it is needed. And we have to have a retention policies for purging unneeded data at least once a quarter. So what do you mean by protecting stored card holder data? This is where your masking requirement comes. That whenever anyone tries to access the credit card data, only the last 4 digits value should be displayed. The remaining value should be masked. So that is what the third requirement is. What is the fourth requirement? Fourth requirement is encrypt transmission of card holder data across open public network. Now, what do you mean by that? PCI DSS compliance requires strong cryptography for card holder data. Encryption must be used when sensitive data is transmitted over public networks such as the internet, cellular network, satellite communication, and wireless network technology. So now here the fourth requirement is talking about encryption. But the encryption should not be only implemented for the data at rest. If you know, there are 3 types of data. One is your data at rest, one is your data in use, and one is your data in motion. So now when I am talking about the fourth requirement, the fourth requirement says that the data at rest should be encrypted, but at the same time, any data which is traveled across the public network, it also should be encrypted. So for that, we can basically use a SSL/TLS certificate to make sure that the data which is exchanged over the public network is encrypted. Okay, so that is what the fourth requirement is all about. What is the fifth requirement? Fifth requirement says use and regular update the antivirus software. So it doesn't matter what kind of antivirus you are having. You might be having an antivirus, anti-malware software, anything. Okay, make sure that your antivirus and anti-malware software are regularly updated with the latest signature updates. Having antivirus and anti-spyware application is not going to help unless and until you have a process of regularly updating the signatures. And you must have a process to validate and verify that whether all the latest signature updates are installed and updated. Now, what is the sixth requirement stands? Sixth requirement stands for develop and maintaining secure systems and applications. So basically the PCI DSS regulation require that the enterprise to update, install all relevant patches, critical systems as soon as possible. So make sure that you have a proper patch management process in place. But when I say proper patch management process in place, that doesn't mean that the moment a patch is released, you will go ahead and install it. First, you have to open a change request. Test that patch in the non-prod or dev environment. Okay, confirm that the patch is not, the patch has not introduced new issues or any existing vulnerabilities and bugs which was fixed. They have not been reintroduced. And after you are satisfied with all this, then only you should, install and push the patch in the production environment. Okay. Otherwise, if without doing all that, if you push it, then if the patch introduce any kind of latency or any kind of downtime, then it will become a single point of failure. So in the PCI DSS, in the 6th requirement, you have to install all relevant patches for critical systems as soon as possible. But before that, you have to also test the patch properly. So in the domain 6, we basically have something called as a regression testing. So regression testing is something where we basically test before we push the patch in the production environment. We basically test that whether the patches has been we basically test the patch in the non-prod and dev environment to see that the patch has not introduced any new issues or the existing bugs has not been reintroduced. And after we are satisfied, then only we push the patch in the production. Now, what is the 7th requirement? 7th requirement says restrict access to the cardholder data by business need to know. So PCI DSS requires that the principle of least privilege should be used to determine access. Unless an access is not needed, the access should not be provided. So we have already discussed in the domain 1, what is the difference between the least privilege and need to know. One live example of a least privilege and need to know is yesterday I shared the Google Drive link. Unless and when you were visiting the Google Drive link, you were asked to submit an access request. After I approved the access request, then only you people were able to access the materials. And even in that, you only have a viewer access. You only have a read access. So you will not be able to upload anything from your Google ID to my Google Drive. That is what your least privilege. So I have restricted your privileges only to read. So restrict access to the cardholder data by business need to know means the PCI DSS requires that the principle of least privilege should be used to determine access. That's a concept that gives access to the data only to those who need it and for only as long as they need it. Access should be based on a person's responsibilities and need to know. Make sure that we have now what is the 8th requirement? The 8th requirement says that assign a unique ID to each person with computer access. So we should not encourage using shared IDs. Okay, even if your organization is having a contractor or a third party employee, for contractor and third party employee also a unique ID should be provided. Okay, and the access to that particular ID should be strictly restricted based on need to know and least privilege. So once the least privilege access is defined, individuals should be given a unique identification that correspond to their data access right. This provides access privileges and tracks who access what data. Now, what is the 9th requirement? The 9th requirement says restrict physical access to the cardholder data. Now, what do you mean by that? Physical access means there has to be a clear VLAN. Okay, there has to be a clear logical or physical isolation. So physical access to the cardholder data must be carefully managed as network access according to the PCI DSS. Only the people who are approved should have access to the devices that basically store the cardholder data. Okay, it doesn't matter, and you have to employ controls like badges, key cards, and biometrics. It doesn't matter how much logical security you are introducing in the system. If you do not pay enough attention to the physical access, once the physical access is compromised, it is the end game for the information security professional. Because once a physical access is achieved, then it is the end game. So you have to pay equal amount of importance to the physical access as well. That is the reason in the domain 3, that is your security, architecture and engineering, we are going to discuss a good amount of concepts on the physical security, that where we have to use security guards, CCTV, doors, what kind of locks we have to use, then what kind of man traps, trap doors and all we have to use, all these kind of things, motion sensors, all these kind of things we are going to discuss in detail. Now, what is the 10th requirement stands for? The 10th requirement says track and monitor all access to the network resources and the cardholder data. So PCI compliant organizations, they must be able to monitor and track network access. This is very much critical to understand how a security breach occurred and defending against cyber security attacks in the future. Okay, you need to monitor all access to network resources specifically for the cardholder data. Specifically, if I can be more specific in this, on the 10th requirement, if your organization has privileged users, every organization, they have a privileged users group who basically have privileged access to the assets or to the crown jewels. Crown jewels means they are those assets which are basically accessed by the crown jewels, are basically sensitive assets which are there for the organization. So any activity when you are track and monitor all access means you should not only monitor all access for the unauthorized users, but you should also use monitor all access to the privileged users as well. Now for this, who have access to the cardholder data. Now for this, many companies, they basically use the user behavior analytics with the help of machine learning and all, where you can enable the use cases. So if an employee or a privileged user connecting to the asset over the weekend, or they are trying to run a touch a particular table which they are not supposed to touch, all this kind of outliers will be monitored and reported. So many organizations, for the 10th requirement, they basically use a user behavioral analytics, they basically use a database activity monitoring and all that. Okay, now what is the 11th requirement stands? The 11th requirement says regularly test security systems and processes. So what do you mean by that? You have to continuously test the systems and processes as a part of PCI DSS. Once in a year, team, I repeat, once in a year, you have to go for a vulnerability assessment and pen testing. Vulnerability assessment can be done on a monthly basis, but once in a year, it is mandatory that all the systems which are processing the PCI DSS data, they must go through a penetration testing. So that is the 11th requirement. And finally, the 12th requirement, make sure that maintain a policy that addresses the information security. It means security policies are essential to achieve PCI compliance. Companies must carefully develop and execute their PCI DSS security policies in a disciplined way. The PCI DSS security policies must also evolve to adapt the changing security threats and should be updated once in a year. As a part of this process of annual risk assessment, you can also identify the critical assets, new applications and gear, as well as you can also identify the new threats and vulnerabilities. Is all the 12 requirements of the PCI DSS clear for everyone?
Yes, Nani.
Okay. So as I was mentioning, privacy shield, data protection requirements when transferring personal data from the European Union and Switzerland to the United States. We also have a FISMA. Now, what do you mean by FISMA? Any question in the exam talking about government contracts. Okay, any question in the exam talking about government contracts or security standard for the protection of US government non-national security systems. Close your eyes and select the answer as FISMA. Any question, I repeat, any question in the exam talking about government contracts, non-national security system, this kind of keyword is there. Close your eyes and select the answer as FISMA. We also have a SOC, so which protects against accounting frauds to protect investors. PCI DSS, we have seen all the 12 requirements in detail. And we also have a HIPAA, which requires data integrity and privacy for health related information. One thing which is common in all these regulations is the data privacy. So the PCI DSS is a information security standard for organizations that handle branded credit card from the major card schemes. Under the PCI DSS, merchants are categorized into the 4 merchant levels according to the number of credit card transactions the merchant is party to annually. The PCI DSS exists to protect the financial institution that has issued the card, especially in the transactional activity. So we basically have a 12 requirements which we have discussed just now. We also have something called as an audit framework for compliance, which is basically called as a COSO, which is Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Trade Commission. This was being basically formed in 1985. This is also a governance model. There are 5 areas of internal control. So we have a control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. But don't worry, COSO is not testable in the exam. What is testable in the exam is COBIT, which we have already covered in detail. So COBIT is control objectives for information and related technology, which is developed by ITGI and ISACA. They basically contain 34 high level process. We also have a ISO 17799, 27002 and 27001, which can be used for as a basis for developing security standard and security management practices. We also have a ITIL. So any question in the exam talking about service management, I repeat, any question in the exam talking about service management, the answer is ITIL. Any question in the exam talking about service management, the answer is ITIL. So now when we are talking about the legislative and regulatory compliance, so depending on the law and regulation team, depending on the law and regulation, the first thing which we create in the organization is your security policy. After the security policy, what is the next thing which we create? We create security standard. Then we create a security baseline, then procedure and guideline. Now, guideline is something which is not mandatory. It is a good to have. So one live example of a security guideline is, so earlier when there was a COVID lockdown, that time when you were traveling in flight or when you were traveling in trains, wearing the mask was compulsory. But now it is a guideline. If you wear mask, it is good. If you don't wear, there is no problem. But earlier it was compulsory. So security guideline is something which is a compulsory. It is good to have. It is not mandatory, but security policy, standard, baseline, procedure, all these are mandatory. Now I'm going to take a scenario on this, which will clear your doubts once and for all in all these things. Just a second. So now let's take an example, team, that we have a company. We have a company called as a Contoso.com. Okay. We have a company called as a Contoso.com. Now the Contoso.com, they have basically a policy. We have created a policy which has said that all the employees, okay, all the employees who are above 7.x level, okay, all the employees who are above the 7.x level. So normally 7.x level people who are above the 7.x level, they will normally be the project manager. They will either be the project manager. Okay. They will either be the project manager or they will be a project lead. They will be a project lead or they will be your, delivery head, or accounts manager. So now my Contoso.com policy says any employee who is above the 7.x level, they must get a MacBook. They must get a MacBook. Along with that, they also should get a noise cancellation headphone. They also should get a noise cancellation headphone. Noise cancellation headphone. Okay, so employees who are above 7.x level, they should get a MacBook. Along with that, they should also get a noise cancellation headphone. Now, this is basically my policy. Now, if you see, this policy is a very generic in nature. So it is a simple policy which says employees above 7.x level should get a MacBook and a noise cancellation headphone. But this policy doesn't mention anywhere what should be the hardware and software configuration of the MacBook, or what kind of noise cancellation, what brand of noise cancellation headphone should be provided. So security policy is basically a statement which is directly coming from the senior management. Okay. So it is a very generic in nature. So when you are creating a security policy, it should not have too much technical details. Okay, so security policy which are coming from the senior management, it is very generic in nature. So it is a simple policy which says employees above 7.x level should have a MacBook with a noise cancellation headphone. This is my security policy. But now after I create a security policy, now the next thing which I have to create is a security standard. Now in the standard, we will basically specify what should be the hardware configuration. What should be the hardware configuration and what should be the software configuration. What should be the hardware and software configuration of the laptop. So whether we are going to provide them an M1, whether we are going to provide them an M2, or whether we are going to provide them an M3, what is the physical memory, SSD, all this, and what kind of operating system we are going to run. That is something which is going to be determined in the security standard. So after the security policy, the next is we have a security standard. Before I move further, is the security policy and standard clear for everyone once and for all?
Yes.
Okay. Just a second. So now when I am talking about, so now the security policy is done, security standard. So now in this, we will determine the hardware and software configuration. We will also determine that what would be the configuration of the headphone. So here we have determined that all the employees who are above 7.x level, they are going to get an M2 laptop with a Mac OS, and the noise cancellation headphone which they are going to get is of Jabra. Okay, Jabra is basically a headphone which is normally being used in majority of the organization which has the noise cancellation feature. Okay, so Jabra headset they are going to provide. So that is your security standard. Now, what is the minimum amount of security which this laptop which we are providing to the 7.x people, it should have? So basically it should have an antivirus. That is the first requirement. Okay, that it should have an antivirus. The second requirement is it should have an anti-malware. Okay. The second requirement is that it should have an anti-malware. The third requirement is that USB drives should be blocked. Okay. USB drives should be blocked. Okay. The third requirement is on websites like Twitter. Okay. Websites like Twitter, websites like Facebook, websites like LinkedIn, this should be blocked. But now the challenge is, as long as the MacBook is within the organization, you can block it. via the proxy. But what if the employees take their laptop to their residence? And how you are going to make sure that Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, they are going to be blocked regardless that whether they are accessing the internet within the organization or outside of the organization. For that, we are going to install an agent-based solution. So that agent is going to be installed. So irrespective of whether they are trying to access internet from the proxy of the organization or whether they are using a hotspot or dongle, regardless, the websites like Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn will be blocked. So this is my security baseline, which I have created for all the 7.x people. Okay. Now the next is my security procedure. So now I have created a policy. Now I have created a standard. Now I have created a baseline. But now we also need to create a procedure, right? So let's say tomorrow, Aditya, we have a person called as Aditya who has joined Contoso. So now Aditya is joined above 7.x level. How he is going to request the laptop? So what is the procedure he has to follow? So he has to raise a ServiceNow request. Okay, he has to raise the IT asset allotment request. He has to take approval. So what is the procedure in order to raise a request to get a laptop and to get a noise cancellation headphone? All these are something detailed procedures, step-by-step procedures are going to be documented in the security procedure. And guideline is something which is a good to have. It is not mandatory. I believe with this example, policy, standard, baseline, and procedure is clear for everyone. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Looks like everyone gone to sleep.
Clear, sir. No. Just reaching out the mic button.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, clear.
So that is what it is. Okay. So now policies are the written aspect of governance, including the security governance. Standards, they specifically mandate explicitly stating expectations of performance or conformance. Procedure, they normally explicit repeatable activities which is required to accomplish a specific task. Baselines are also used to define what is the minimum level of protection which is required. And guidelines are basically suggestion which is used to assist the user, system personnel, others in effectively securing the system. It is not compulsory. So from the exam point of view, you need to remember policy is a pinnacle of the hierarchy. Standards are the next. Procedures are most detailed and guidelines inform the organization how to conduct the activities. So this is how the thing is work. So basically we have a policy coming from senior management. The CISO implements the policies. Based on that, we have a standards, hardware and software, how to request for the laptop, what is the minimum level of security is needed, and guidelines. Take a screenshot of this. This will help you to understand the pinnacle. Guys, I hope my speed is okay for everyone. I'm not going too fast.
Yeah, man, no problem.
Okay. Question. Read the answer, read the question, identify the keywords, and then give the answer. Don't be in a hurry. Start.
Money, I'm confused between standards and procedures.
Okay, I will explain it. Let others answer and then I will explain. Okay. Okay. So after a policy is developed, which of the following must be determined? First, for directing users on how to handle an information asset. Okay, so now here the keyword is after the policy. So after a policy is developed, the next is we have a standard. Now someone asked a question that they got confused between standard and procedure. See, when we are talking about standard and procedure team, standard talks about your configuration. So like all the employees above 7.x should get a MacBook along with the noise cancellation headphone. This is a generic policy. But what would be the configuration of that laptop? Hardware configuration, software configuration. What would be the make of the model? That is something which is documented in the standard. But procedure talks about how to request that. Okay, so how you are going to raise a IT asset allocation request in the company when you join. So procedure talks about how you can obtain a laptop and a noise cancellation headphone. What kind of procedures are, what kind of approvals are needed? Now it is clear between standard and procedure.
Yeah, clear.
Yeah. Next, read the question carefully, guys. Okay, so now which statements regarding security policy are correct? Here you have to select choose two. Okay, so first we will try to eliminate the wrong ones. So a security policy is developed after the implementation of the standard operating procedures. See, a security policy is not developed after the implementation of standard operating procedures, right? It has to be always developed prior. So definitely D is gone. Okay. A security policy establishes the authority and responsibility of individual, and it is tactical in nature. No, it is not tactical. If you remember my earlier discussion, security policy is a strategic document. Okay, and the validity of the strategic document is between 3 to 5 years. Okay, it is between 3 to 5 years. So that is the reason why I am not going with the option D as well. Okay, so E and D is straightforward removed because it is not tactical in nature. Okay, a security policy establishes the authority and the responsibilities of individual, and it is strategic in nature. That is true. So I can park this option for now. A security policy lays down broad security objectives of an organization. It lays down the performance objective. See, a security policy never lays down the performance objective. That is something which we measure in the KPI and KRI. So the best answer in this is A and C. The best answer in this is A and C. So let me see how many people have answered. Yep. आदित्य भाई ये ऐसा लास्ट टू मिडल टू ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. You have to be specific what answer. Otherwise, I will not
Okay.
give the scoring.
Okay, sure. Next time I will.
So now the summary is to establish a stable security governance that addresses the threats to an organization's survivability and profitability. So we basically, so now what is the summary till now what we discussed? So what does security governance what does security governance achieve? First, in order to establish a security governance, first we need to create an information security strategy. Now that information security strategy is something which needs approval from the senior management. So when we say information security strategy, this is where we, create the policies. Okay. This is where we create the policies. So the policies can be created by CISO, but it will be approved by the senior management, that is your CEO, or it is your stakeholders. Okay, it will be approved by your CEO or stakeholders. Okay, so first we create an information security strategy. We obtain approval from senior management. We establish the roles and responsibilities of individuals. So what is the role and responsibility of a CISO? What is the role and responsibility of a CFO? What is the role and responsibility of a CRO? What is the role and responsibility of a CIO / CTO? Everything we determine here. We also determine the reporting and communication channel. So basically, we also determine that how the CISO is going to report. So a CISO, it is always recommended that the CISO should report as much high as possible. Okay, so we establish the reporting and communication channel. Here we conduct the risk assessment to identify the legal issues and assess the impact. Then, in order to address the legal issues, we establish and maintain the security policies. Then we develop the procedures, and finally we develop a business case. So the summary is very simple, team. First, we develop the security strategy. We obtain approval from senior management. We establish the roles and responsibilities of the individual. We determine their reporting and communication channels. We conduct a risk assessment, which is part of the risk management activity to identify any legal issues and what would be the impact if it is realized. We establish and maintain security policies which can address the legal issues. We develop procedures and guidelines which can basically support the policy. And finally, we develop a business case. So this is the summary of till now what we have discussed in the security governance. Now at this point, our security governance topic is